Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy 1 week before Halloween. And we have a great pumpkin parade going on today. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to our friends and visitors and people who have brought visitors. We would love to know who you are. If you are feeling particularly happy and brave, please stand up and let us know who you are and from where you came. Hi.
I have my stepdaughter from Facebook today, and she's going there and she's here joining us today.
Welcome. Do we have anyone else? Yes. Well, drove through the color to get up here, maybe. Welcome, Lois. Good to have you in our midst again. Yes.
Carrie's mother-in-law and Harris's mother.
Well, and your name? And your name? Mary. Thank you. Glad to have you here. Welcome. Yes.
I'm Alex Patel. We live in Westland. We're excited over wine.
Boy, you picked a good day. Welcome. Got a lot of little costumes up here. We have a Sunday Plus lunch today, and those who are visiting are most welcomed and encouraged to attend, and you will be our guest today. When you finish the service, go out to the visitors table, and you will be ushered through the line, and you will be our guest. Also, make note that any veterans who are here today, your lunch is free in honor of your service to our country. I believe that's it for our words of welcome, and now we're going to have the All Souls Children's Choir.
There's a big fat pumpkin sitting with his friends, together in a field of gold, waiting to come in. There's a big fat pumpkin looking right at me, what a pretty sight to see. There's a big fat pumpkin, face is painted bright, a hat is perched upon his head, doesn't look quite right. There's a big fat pumpkin looking right at me, what a pretty sight to see. There's a big fat pumpkin shining in the night. His face is quite atrocious and filled with candlelight. There's a big fat pumpkin looking right at me. What a smoky sight to see.
Those are some pumpkins. Welcome to the gathering of this community of memory and promise, where we celebrate the cycle of the seasons upon our turning earths and the cycle of life within the bonds of friendship and covenant. Reflecting on the purpose of human consciousness in the vastness of an impersonal universe, the humanist philosopher and poet Kenneth Patton has said this: "The dark heavens have grown eyes for seeing in the sightless forehead of empty space, our eyes. The wordless wind has found its voice in our speaking. Purpose has evolved from fire and chemical habit. From instinct and passion, our minds have evolved for searching and design. Yet to come will be the day of the maturity of this human race, the years of our glory and greatness. Some tomorrow, the universe will come into its own in the wisdom of its children. Write this upon the milestone of today, on the highway of cosmic history. Mark this day upon the calendar of the universe, the record of humanity. This day, a few brief 1,000 years of the human story, marks the coming of mind. On this day, the universe in our minds began to think. On this day, the universe said, I know myself. I am. This is what I am going to be. Once again, here today, let us take up with intention this noble burden that we are the light of awareness amidst the swirl of space and stars. From the matter and energy of our brains arises mind and conscience, the perception of beauty, the yearning for love, the structures of reason. Unless we bring these human capacities to bear on our living, the cosmos remains unseen and wonder vanishes from creation. Within your mind and heart, the drama of the universe plays out. You hear the music of the spheres, or it goes unheard. You behold the majesty of worlds and planets. You and your kind bring whatever understanding and wisdom there is to be. Grow into this dignity and the maturity of our humanity. Let your mind roam the stars and your heart embrace its most boundless love. We light our chalice for the summoning of the human spirit to the realms of imagination, to be more than we thought we could, and together build the world of our best dreams.
Good morning.
Is it coming on? It's on. You're good. Just hold it real close.
My name is Charlotte Rainey, and I light this chalice for the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
Got it. Thank you, Charlotte. Now let's rise in body and spirit and join together in the words of our community's covenant. In one voice we affirm, goodwill is the spirit of this church. and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And let's remain standing for our opening hymn.
Speak truly, and each word you say shall be a fruitful seed. Live truly, and your life shall show thy great and noble creed. Be kindly, and your caring thought a broken world shall end. Speak gently, and each word of peace shall find a faithful friend. Live simply, and your life will be a blessing without end.
Now, I noticed that most of the children have taken their pumpkins and gone, so we don't have to be jealous about their costumes. But I invite you to turn to someone and say good morning, someone nearby you, hopefully someone you didn't come in with. And I invite you to share with them, if you had a Halloween costume this year, what would it be? Well, my Now, we don't have a lot of children here at this point, but let's sing their blessing anyway.
All right, good morning. My name's Angela Allard, and I'm one of the members of the Social Responsibility Board here at All Souls. It has been my pleasure to be on the SRB board. We have chosen to help sponsor the Stand Up KC group, and through our sponsorship, they are able to meet here at our church free of charge, and they've been having their organizing meetings here. Some of you guys may have seen them. When they show up in mass, okay? And it's difficult. Many of them have worked long days in our fast food restaurants because they're the fast food organizers fighting for $15 an hour wages and a union. And that's really their most important fight, is being able to organize and stand up for the rights of their workers. And they're not just doing fast food workers. Once they got started, they found out that those adjunct professors at many of our colleges are paid less than $15 an hour for the work that they do. Our home health care workers oftentimes are not paid that wage. It's not a living wage. Here in this area, $15 is what it would take to sustain a family of two, and many of them have more than two people in their households. We've had folks come here to testify as part of Stand Up KC that they have children, they're working full-time jobs, and yet they find themselves homeless on occasion. So, I love the fact that All Souls has been able to support Stand Up KC. Our offering today will go to help them continue their work. They have had an effect. We have not been able to pass $15 minimum wage in Missouri yet, but we're working on it. And I think that, eventually we will succeed. One of the things that happens here on Sunday evenings is they are giving a college-level class to some of their workers. They show up here, they take a 2-hour class every Sunday night in public speaking so that they are able to go out and tell their stories. It's just amazing, the dedication of these folks. And you can see the effect of their energy and their organizing skills when you watch the election stuff, right? This has been an issue with both of the presidential candidates. So thank you for your support this morning for our folks from Stand Up KC and your offering. Today, if you will designate on your checks that it goes to the special offering or to Stand Up KC, it will be greatly appreciated.
Let's join together in the words of dedication. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create a just and compassionate society. And we'll go on to the readings.
everybody is probably looking up at me and thinking, oh no, it's the woman who read about her vagina last week. Not again. Actually, this is from A Circle of Quiet by Madeleine L'Engle, who's better known for A Wrinkle in Time. It's called Being a Self. I first became aware of myself as self when I was 7 or 8 years old. We lived in an apartment on East 82nd Street in New York, and my bedroom window looked out on the court. I could see into the apartments across the way, and sometimes I did. One evening, when I was looking out, I saw a woman undressing by her open window. She took off her dress, stretched, stood there in her slip, not moving, not doing anything, just standing there, being. And that was my moment of awareness. That woman across the court, who did not know me and whom I did not know, was a person. She had thoughts of her own. She was. Our lives would never touch. I would never know her name. And yet it was she who revealed to me my first glimpse of personhood. When I woke up in the morning, the wonder of that revelation stuck with me. There was a woman across the court, and she had dreams and inner conversations which were just as real as mine, and which did not include me. But she was there. She was real, and so, therefore, was everybody else in the world. And so, therefore, was I. I got out of bed and stood in front of the mirror, and for the first time, looked at myself consciously. I, too, was real, standing there, thin and gawky in my white nightgown. I did more than exist. I was. That afternoon, when I went to the park, I looked at everybody I passed on the street, full of the wonder of their realness.
Good morning. When I got the reading for today, I called Kendall and came by and talked with her. And she said, "What's up?" And I said, "Well, it's a confusing, hard reading." And we discussed it, and it didn't make it any less confusing or less hard. But she said, "Okay, go ahead and make a few words of introduction." And what I want to say by way of introduction is that in the last several decades, our neuroscientists, the people who study how the brain is wired and how we're all put together and how this comes together to make us human and so on, they've come to the conclusion that there's no one there, which is absolutely contrary to everybody's experience and absolutely contrary to the history of humanity's perception of itself. So the reading that I'm going to share with you builds on that. It's called On Having No Head by Douglas Harding. The best day of my life was when I found I had no head. It was 18 years ago, when I was 33, that I made the discovery. Though it certainly came out of the blue, it did so in response to an urgent inquiry. I had for several months been absorbed in the question, what am I? The fact that I happened to be walking in the Himalayas at the time probably had little to do with it, though in that country unusual states of mind are said to come more easily. Somehow or other, I had vaguely thought of myself as inhabiting this house, my body, and looking out through its two round windows at the world. Now I find it isn't really like that at all. As I gaze into the distance, What is there at this moment to tell me how many eyes that I have? 2, 3, hundreds? None. In fact, only one window appears on this side of my facade, and that is wide open and frameless, with nobody looking out of it. It is always the other fellow who has eyes and a face to frame them, never this one. There exist then two sorts of humans. The first, of which I note countless specimens, evidently carries a head on its shoulders, and by head I mean a hairy 8-inch ball with various holes in it. While the second, of which I note only this one specimen, evidently carries no such thing on its shoulders. Until now, I had overlooked this considerable difference. Victim of a prolonged fit of madness, of a lifelong hallucination, the dictionary says, an apparent perception of an object that is not actually present. I had invariably seen myself as pet pretty much like other humans, certainly never as a decapitated, but still living biped. I had been blind to the one thing that is always present, and without which I am blind indeed, to this marvelous substitute for a head, this unbounded charity, this luminous and absolutely pure void, which nevertheless is rather than contains all things. For however carefully I attend, I fail to find here even so much as a blank screen on which they are reflected, or a transparent lens through which they are viewed, still less a soul or a mind to which they are presented, or even a viewer, however shadowy, who can be distinguished from this view. On having no head.
This is from the writings of Chuang Tzu. Those who dream of a banquet may wake up to weep the next morning. Those who dream of lamentation and sorrow may wake to join a hunt. While they dream, they do not know that they are dreaming. In our dreams, we may even interpret our dreams. And only after we are awake do we realize that we have dreamed of a dream. By and by, there comes a great awakening, and then we may find out that life is really just a great dream. Fools think they are awake all the time and flatter themselves they know if they are really princes or peasants. Confucius and you are both dreams. And I who say you are dreams, I am but a dream myself. This is a paradox. Tomorrow a wise man may come forward and explain it, but that tomorrow will not be until 10,000 generations have gone by. Once I, Chuang Tzu, dreamed I was a butterfly, happily fluttering hither and thither, to all intents and purposes, a butterfly. I was conscious only of the following my fancies as a butterfly, and was unconscious of my individuality as a human being. Suddenly I awoke, and there I lay, myself again. Now I do not know whether it was Chuang Tzu's dreaming that he was a butterfly, or whether I am now a butterfly dreaming that I am Chuang Tzu. We've all been there, right? Between a man and a butterfly, there must be some distinction. This paradox is called the transformation of things.
I want to thank the readers this morning for allowing me to mess with your minds by first messing with theirs. Among the many irksome aspects of this season's presidential campaign, and there have been many, it's almost over, folks, just a couple more weeks. But for heaven's sake, get yourselves and everyone you know to the polls.
Amen.
Among its tiresome aspects has been its intellectual vacuity. The entire process seems to have taken as its motto Maya Angelou's famous assertion that while people will forget what you said, and even what you did, they will never forget how you made them feel. Even Hillary, whose capacities and interests probably incline the other way, has been processed ad nauseum through the filter of how everybody feels about her. And I get that many, perhaps most, American voters are more swayed by emotional response than by considerations requiring intellectual effort. But I'm finding this marathon of political empathy a bit tedious at this point. So this morning I invite us all to take a break. Let's actually think. About some ideas together, shall we? Just for something different. A decade ago, in early 2006, University of Minnesota researchers conducted a telephone survey of over 2,000 households in which they found that Americans rate atheists below Muslims, recent immigrants, gays and lesbians, and other minority groups in sharing their vision of American society. Atheists are also the minority group most Americans are least willing to allow their children to marry. The lead researcher of that study, Penny Edgell, noted that atheists offer a glaring exception to the rule of increasing social tolerance over the last 30 years. It seems most Americans believe that diversity is fine, she continues, as long as everyone shares a common core of values that make them trustworthy. And in America, that core has historically been religious. Americans believe that they share more than rules and procedures with their fellow citizens. They share an understanding of right and wrong. Our findings seem to rest on a view of atheists as self-interested individuals who are not concerned with the common good. The Ontario Consultants on Religious Tolerance observe in their report on this and similar surveys that it would appear that atheists have a major public relations job ahead of them before they can be widely accepted and valued. This despite indications that the percentage of American adults who do not follow any organized religion nearly doubled between 1990 and 2001, and it's still in that process. At that point, went from 8% to 14% of the adult population. I think it's now up around 20%, making atheists, agnostics, non-believers, secularists, humanists, and so on the fastest growing segment of the national religious landscape. Those of us, like me, who find ourselves included in this suspect category, may go ahead and wax indignant about it if we choose. But we would be better advised to spend our energy seeking to understand the basis for the reportedly common view that we are self-interested individuals who are not concerned with the common good, and how we might most effectively refute that perception. So here's my thought. Since I am not persuaded of any divine creation or management of the universe, I would argue that it has been evolutionary pressure, not divine mandate, that has made all of us insistently moral beings, precisely because we are a social species. Those individuals who best maintain the network of mutuality in their communities thrive best and ultimately have the greatest reproductive success. Thus, we are hardwired for a sense of ethical relatedness. However, as with many other attributes which serve our genetic success, this moral awareness does not come fully formed when a particular human being is born. Like the innate capacity for language, its potential is there, awaiting the environmental and relational experiences that will give it form and cause it to develop in certain particular ways. We are all born with the urgent ability to learn to speak, but we are not born knowing English or Chinese. In the same way, we are endowed with ethical sensibilities, but the specific content of right and wrong will be filled in by a social context. Educators and developmental psychologists have invested a great deal of time and energy observing how that moral sense emerges and is formed in people as they grow. Exactly how it can be stunted or twisted, what it looks like at different stages along the way, and what are some of its cultural variations. Out of those explorations emerges one seemingly universal and rather mysterious process, which is the idea I want to consider today in reference to the potential morality or otherwise of atheists. This most basic premise for human morality I am calling the attribution of consciousness. Some philosophers and students of brain function call it a theory of mind. It is the hypothesis, which seems obvious only until you really start to think about it, as the readings this morning suggest, that the universe contains other awarenesses just like one's own. The idea that other people, and indeed other creatures, constitute individual centers of experience analogous to mine is a kind of conceptual light switch, which is not really a function of intellectual information. It is an emergent understanding that unfolds gradually as part of development and maturation. And if it works properly, it becomes so basic to our perception of the world that we almost can't even really examine it or conceive what the alternative belief would be like. Most of us, as functional adults, take it for granted, both that other people see and hear and feel much as we do, and conversely, that what we observe about them is likely to be true to a greater or lesser extent about ourselves. Most morality, certainly of the humanist variety, comes back to this principle, which is the foundation alike of the child's crude ethical question, how would you like it if someone did that to you? And the loftiest formulation of universal imperatives or golden rules, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. One traditional measure of moral maturity has been the width across which an individual is able to apply this principle. Just how broadly are we able to attribute consciousness? Beyond all sophistry about economic costs and benefits or rights of property opposed to rights of liberty, slavery was self-apparently wrong because anyone could see from their own center of consciousness that they themselves would be miserable as a slave, and therefore ought to be able to attribute that perception to other people who were enslaved. Torture is wrong precisely because how would you like it if someone did that to you? The attribution of consciousness is the foundation of human moral understanding. Without it, our guidance is theoretical, and our behavior may all too easily fall into the category that we term inhuman, which designates just exactly that failure to ascribe to others our own reaction to pain. The question then becomes, just how widely are we to cast this net of attribution? And this is where I want to suggest the moral suspicion of atheism arises. For most of us recognize intuitively that a person who does not attribute consciousness to others is missing some crucial factor in what would make him or her a morally reliable participant in our networks of mutuality. Much of the analysis of sociopathic criminals notes their severely stunted capacity for empathy. They do not identify with the pain they cause. They fail to attribute to their victims feelings like their own. There is a logical progression which suggests that developmentally we move from attributing consciousness first to those nearest to us whose reactions we experience close up, next to other people in circumstances like our own with whom it is easy for us to identify, then to people like ourselves, and later to people in general, expanding the circle of attributed consciousness wider and wider as we go. Somewhere along the line, we may add non-human creatures to that list, recognizing that different as the consciousness of an animal might be from ours, we do share some crucially relevant capacity for the experiences of suffering and well-being that make them also objects of moral consideration. It is not terribly surprising, then, that multitudes of human beings have arrived at the conclusion that it is equally appropriate to ascribe to the universe as a whole, in its totality, the same sort of consciousness, and to perceive that we have some set of moral obligations to a larger universal consciousness, which still so much resembles our own. Thus arises the notion of an anthropomorphic God. And I suspect that it is our failure to attribute consciousness to the larger forces of the cosmos that makes many people nervous about atheists like me. The old chestnut question, well, how can you be moral if you don't believe in God, may not always be asking exactly what we generally interpret it to mean. To those of us to whom such inquiries are addressed most often, usually hear them as variations of either, how do you know what the ethical rules are supposed to be if there is no God to tell you? Or more commonly, if there is no authority who is going to reward you for keeping the rules or punish you for breaking them, what motivation do you have to follow them? When we respond with affirmations of the good for its own sake, or for human well-being as a whole, that answer often doesn't seem to satisfy the underlying question. We might come closer to the real issue if we heard the question as having to do with the attribution of consciousness, as parallel to something like, if you don't suppose that I have an awareness of pleasure and pain much like your own, how can I feel safe about the way you might decide to treat me? People who fail to attribute consciousness appropriately are dangerous, as can easily be seen in the case of non-human creatures. If someone tells me that animals do not have feelings that count, I am going to be most reluctant to entrust that person with the well-being of my cats. It is along these lines, I think, that popular opinion so distrusts the proclaimed atheist. Those of us who fall into that category or are close enough are within our rights to feel impatient with the question of why we should be good if no one is keeping score. But in my experience, few, if any, people actually conduct their moral lives on the basis of bribes and threats. Most of us want to be moral because that is the better way to live. So do even most folks who accept the propositions of heaven and hell, usually on behalf of others. But if there is no consciousness like our own, beyond our own, if that doesn't exist, how shall we love the world and hold life itself in reverence? That, it seems to me, is a fair question. It has any number of possible good answers, but it is a reasonable thing to ask. One of the possible and quite ancient answers to that question is the tradition of spiritual practice that invites us to recognize that our own consciousness is not exactly what we usually think of it as being. As Douglas Hardy suggests, when you get over the notion that you must be very much like all the other human beings you see walking around, and stop thinking that you have an 8-inch hairy ball and with various holes on top of your shoulders, just like all of them, then you can begin to realize how vast the perception is that you have where everyone else has an ordinary head. It's counterintuitive, but it's a rather exhilarating exercise once you get the hang of it. Such a perspective invites us to realize the extent to which our normal consciousness is such a limited subset of the universe that it would be silly to try to see the totality of everything as analogous to our rather puny awareness. Instead of imposing our experience on the cosmic scale, we should rather strive to realize how much of that larger reality our perceptions constantly miss. Another, somewhat more complicated response is to affirm the moral relevance of beauty and order in the cosmos without needing to ascribe a personal awareness to it. Our sense of moral obligation may rest upon the foundation of attributed consciousness, but that doesn't mean it necessarily has to end there. It may expand to include even that which is much more unlike ourselves. The slowly emerging sense of humanity's ecological impact as an ethical concern is one example of this kind of structural expansion of our moral categories. Alice Walker's familiar quote from The Color Purple, when she realizes her spiritual connections to everything so deeply that I knew if I cut a tree, my arm would bleed, illustrates this kind of perception at work. Yet another possible answer suggests that human relationships, perhaps extended also to animals, provide ample moral guidance for our present needs. If we could ever truly come to the point of ascribing full consciousness to our fellow individual creatures, both human and non-human, if we could consistently treat them all as we ourselves would prefer to be treated, that would actually be quite sufficient. Doing so would certainly represent a vast progress over the common run of current human behavior. And at that point, there would be time enough to worry about our obligations to anything more cosmic. All three of these points are intelligent responses to the riddle of how an atheist can be a moral person. And it certainly becomes each of us to ponder how we might reply thoughtfully as individuals to such a challenge. And yet, in the end, perhaps the most important answer that any of us can make is to live and behave and treat other people in such a manner that our ability to attribute consciousness to others and to respect in them the feelings that we know from our own experience is clearly demonstrated. Our minds are constructed in such a way that I can never prove my thoughts and feelings to be like yours. I cannot actually see with your eyes, feel what is in your heart, walk in your shoes. We take that commonality, finally, on faith. We have to. That some important part of what it means to me to be a human being is very like what it means to you. That the pain and joy you feel is significantly and relevantly similar to my own experiences. Perhaps we really are all part of the butterfly's dream. There's no way, finally, to tell. But even so, the needs and hopes and sufferings that we share are still the source of the good that we know. It makes sense that all people want to be assured that we can trust one another, at least to try to imagine the impact of our actions by what it would be like to be on the receiving end. That we have that essential basis of moral perception, the attribution of consciousness to others. For me, it is enough to suppose that my mirror is in you. I do not need to find it also writ large in the personality of the universe. And I do not believe that it is to be found there. But I understand why, for some people, that act of moral imagination seems important, even perhaps essential. My most pressing task is not to try to talk them out of their perspective, but only to show, through my own steadfast commitment to a life of ethical insight and behavior, that even without attributing consciousness to the universe in the person of God, it is still possible for me to be good. If only we might resolve all our competing ideologies on the basis of who among their advocates leads the most admirable life. If only we might learn to take to heart the saying I learned many years ago in UU Sunday School, that if your religion makes you kinder than me, then your religion is better than mine. Let's make sure, shall we, that by such a measure, our own lives here in the community of skeptics and free thinkers will always do our convictions credit. In 1906, when evolutionary biology had begun to permeate the popular imagination, and Einstein's theory of relativity had just been published, a Unitarian professor of literature by the name of William Herbert Caruth wrote a poem comparing the unfolding of the cosmos to an expanding human moral awareness. These realities both evoke a reverence in us, he suggests, that can be appropriately described in theistic language, but need not be. His words seem like an appropriate way to conclude these reflections. Let's stand and sing together. extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fires of commitment. For all these we carry in our minds and hearts until we are together again. And so for all who seek God, may God go with you. For all who embrace life, may life return your affection. And for all who seek the right path, may a way be found and the courage to follow it step by step. Go in peace.